Do you get frustrated when working with brokers? On today's episode of Driven Too Far, we're tackling the top 5 driver issues when hauling broker freight. Hello, I'm Andrew Winkler with Chief Carriers, and this is Driven Too Far, the truth about trucking, a podcast that helps over-the-road truck drivers balance career and family. Hey, welcome back to this episode of Driven Too Far. Today we've got special guest Dan Adams with Chief Logistics, and we're talking about driver issues when working with brokers. Welcome to the show, Dan.
Well, thanks for having me.
Yeah, you bet. So let's dive right in. I want to kind of play the advocate for the driver side of things. So I'm looking from the driver's point of view here. But I've got some questions for you when working with brokers and stuff. And I think it's probably just starting out with communication. So tell me, why do I have to call the broker direct? Why can't you just give my dispatcher all the information they need?
Well, a lot of times there are dispatchers in the industry that are better than others, and we want to make sure that the driver has the full details that may not get relayed to them from the dispatcher, and also verifying that there's actually a driver behind the wheel in a way to prevent double brokering or fraud in the industry. So we find it best to communicate with them. So if they have any questions for us or any special details that we need to give to them, such as site, PPE, or delivery deadlines and whatnot, we want to make sure that information is well conveyed.
That's a pretty good point, actually, and it's probably something that's changed more over the last couple of years when you talk about the fraud thing and things going on. I mean, years ago, we didn't really have to worry about a lot of that, but it's become so prevalent nowadays that I get that, I guess, that you want to actually make sure there is a driver here and it's not somebody out there stealing the load. Maybe it's a dispatch service or something misrepresenting themselves. And there is actually a real chief driver or whatever carrier they're representing on the load, right?
Absolutely. It's an added layer of security for everybody involved.
I've even heard as people going so far as asking for the driver to take a photograph of maybe the truck in the background with the name on the truck or something like that. Have you heard of that, or have you ever done that?
I have heard of that. A lot of times we don't necessarily need to go that far with it. We want to make sure, though, that when the driver shows up to the shipper, that the correct information is on the side of the truck for who we brokered the load to. So we make sure that the shipper has that information in advance so we don't add another layer of inconvenience for the driver to have to send a picture to us. We want to allow them to have as positive an experience with us as possible. So as long as we have the carrier information to share with that shipper can then confirm they're loading the right truck, verify everything's on the up and up, and everybody's loaded on the way.
Yeah, that makes some sense. I totally get that. Let's talk about rates for just a minute. I think from my perspective as a driver, I know you guys are making a ton of money. You're holding out on me. You're not paying my company as much as you should. So what do brokers really make, or how do you set pricing?
If that were true, I wouldn't be here today. I would have retired a long time ago.
Yeah.
The pricing we price our customers at it's competitive and is based off the spot market, which, believe it or not, carriers actually have the same access to that information when searching the load boards. They're to click on a specific load they're viewing, look at that lane. That pricing it shows that you should get for that is typically how we're going to price that lane and make sure, that we've got at least that in it to give to you. The end of the day, the customer dictates the price. Some are price driven, some are service driven, and we've got to be competitive to get the freight. We're not trying to make $1 million on a load or run any carrier into the ground or driver. We price it competitively based off the information we have at our disposal, that we see that is the going rate for that specific lane, and we price it accordingly. So the margins aren't huge. We're not making a killing. We're making enough to keep in business and on to the next one.
So it's is it like when you set the price that you're going to give the carrier, are you trying to make a certain percentage on the load, or is it a flat dollar amount, or does it kind of work both ways?
I think every company has a desired minimum just to cover their expenses for the back of the house, front of the house, to process the order in the billing process. And of course, you want to have something on top of that so you're not just breaking even. I don't think anybody's in the industry to be a freight philanthropist. So, right. we're going to try to get as much as we can, but we want to be as fair as possible to both the carriers that we're working with as well as the customers that we're working with.
And I kind of wonder this, and I know the answer to it from a driver perspective. I don't know that all drivers are aware that there's different pricing in different lanes. You know, when you run from California to the Midwest versus the Midwest to California, it's at a different cost, and it's based on supply and demand. So even when you're looking at some of the charts and things out there and they tell you that the average flatbed rate is $242 a mile, that doesn't mean that every lane across the country runs for $242 a mile. That means there's some at $1.50 and there's probably some at $3 and stuff like that.
That's true. And also when you're looking at that pricing, it also tells you how many companies are reporting on that. So the smaller number of reports, the wider the range can be on that rate. What those rates say in certain pricing tools you can use initially won't tell you is that some of those higher rates are due to perhaps on flatbed they could be oversized or overweight or expedited because you're paying for a team drive or hazmat. There are certain things in play that aren't reflected in that price that drive it up. And when people see that, they'll feel that they're owed more. But it's not the reality of it. It was just because there's only a handful of reports on that lane. And there's 8 reports, and there was a project for a customer that had, 6 hazmat moves on that lane, and that gets reported versus the only other 2 lanes or trucks rather, or loads that weren't hazmat. It skews the numbers.
It's going to look inflated.
Yes.
Yeah. So I don't know if from the driver's side, if they're looking at load boards, I don't know if it tells them how many carriers are reporting volumes or anything like that. But just understand the more volume there is in that lane, probably the more accurate that average price is.
Absolutely. The more people reporting on it, the more reliable the information is for that going rate.
How about just thinking about transparency and things like that? I feel like as a driver that just, when my dispatch tells me you're going to work with a broker on this load, I'm like, oh man, it's just, there's always this lack of transparency. I always feel like the broker is purposely leaving something out. Is that true? Are you just trying to get me on and off the phone and get the load moved? Or
just like everybody else you meet in life, there are good people and there are bad people. And there are ones that you'll go back and hang out with and ones you'll swear off and never talk to again.
I don't want to ever haul for those guys again.
Yeah, it's kind of like, ex-girlfriends. You see them again or never again. So, we try to leave a positive experience with every carrier we work with, and we hope they give us a chance to show them how we're different in what we do. We don't want to mislead anybody because an inconvenience for the driver, whether they may want to believe it or not, is also an inconvenience for us. And my goal is to make everybody's life easier from my perspective. Now, are there sketchy, shady brokers out there that aren't giving you all the details? Because
100%.
if they did, you wouldn't take the load. I want to make sure you know all the details because I don't want an angry driver calling me or a dispatcher. I want to be upfront, straightforward, and here are the details. Then it makes for a smooth ride for everybody. There are no surprises, and then we can work together again, having established that foundation of trust on the first go. We don't want to hide that from you because you're not going to want to work with us again if we do that, and I don't want that reputation for myself or my company. So we tell you straight.
Yeah, I think we all have the same, end game in mind and stuff. And we just want a smooth transaction where the information is shared across both parties. You get what you need, I get what I need. We get from A to B with no issues, and everybody gets paid on time.
Absolutely. And we certainly don't want a driver making delivery and something's gone wrong, and then maybe our customers looking at us, why didn't you tell this to the carrier? Well, we don't want to be on that side of it. So just let the good times roll and be honest with each other.
Let me ask you this. Is there ever a time, from your perspective, when you book a load with a dispatcher, you're giving them all the information they really need to be successful to move that. Sometimes the dispatcher doesn't maybe put all the information in the load or doesn't share everything. And then the driver has a perception that you didn't give me all the information or somebody lied to me. That's always a big one, right? We always think dispatchers and brokers lie. I don't think that's the case. I think people are leaving out information, whether it's on purpose or not on purpose, but it's just crappy communication.
It is. And it's kind of like that game you play maybe elementary school. Telephone, is it?
Right.
Each person that gets in the mix, the message gets a little more distorted and incorrect, if you will. We've had drivers reach out to us saying, well, I would have never took this load if I knew these requirements. Well, we told the dispatcher that. The dispatcher may have just wanted to get you a load so they can go home for the weekend, and now it's up to you and me to sort it out. Like I said, communication is everything. And at times having that conversation with the driver before getting all the load details can help kind of prevent those issues from arising and having an upset driver because now you're stuck having to, wait to load because you're working, because you missed an appointment your dispatcher didn't tell you about, late delivery, all these other things that come along with it. Communication's key. If we all keep each other in the loop, we'll all be able to win together and, live a happily ever after until the next load at least.
And maybe that goes back to our first point when we were talking about communication is maybe that's one of the reasons why you want to talk directly to the driver is to ensure that you get all the details you need and stuff. Because, let's face it, sometimes the dispatchers leave things out or maybe they see something in the load confirmation they don't think is important, but it really is important from the driver's perspective.
Yes, absolutely. And it could be as simple as something with the pickup numbers, making sure they've got that and what have you. So.
All right, this is a big one. I want to know, this pisses me off as a driver because nowadays everybody wants to track my phone, right? You want real-time tracking on me and stuff, and my dispatcher tells me, hey, you got to download this app, that app, whatever, and make sure you're tracking this load. So I do that. I comply. I don't like to do it, but I comply to do it. But yet I'm still getting a gazillion phone calls from the broker. So what is it you need as a broker? To me, it's either we're going to talk on the phone and track that way, or we're going to do your app. But this thing where it's both, and I continually get phone calls, is really frustrating.
Well, there's a lot of things in play that go into that and a lot of parties involved. For me, it goes back to what we're just talking about with communication. If I talk to you on the phone, I'm going to trust that you're going to keep me informed that something goes wrong along the way. You're going to let me know. And I'm like you, I'd rather it be one or the other. The problem is that there are drivers out there that just to get the load and get loaded will download a certain tracking app on their phone.
Right.
They'll get loaded and then they'll delete it. And a lot of times brokers are paying more money for the driver to use that service. Well, now our only option is to call you. And sometimes the technology for that app just isn't working and it's spotty. And maybe somebody needs to call you because the customer requested tracking every 2 hours, 3 hours over the weekend, wherever the case may be. For me, I don't like to talk on the phone if I don't have to. So I'm not calling to bother anybody and just to waste their time. I'm one of those short and sweet checking in. Typically, though, that's kind of what it is. It's a mix. Some people also just don't know how to do their job well, or they may have had a bad experience with the carrier, maybe for that same customer, maybe that same lane, and now there's distrust because the last one went so poorly for them on the delivery and the tracking that they're over the top on this one. So sometimes carriers are paying for other carriers' mistakes in that regard, and that's just a broker preventing it from happening again. And certainly you wouldn't want to have that same negative experience happen on back-to-back loads for your customer because by the third one, they may not be a customer anymore.
Yeah, and I think about how the technologies move forward, and one of the things that's happened in our industries is when this tracking technology came out by the use of the cell phones and the drivers and stuff, you got the big brokerages out there that are running into their customers and say, hey, look at this new technology that's out there. We can now live track all these assets, whether it's on a company truck or whether it's on a brokered load. So the customer likes that, and all of a sudden they start to demand that from all of their brokers and people that are moving their freight.
Correct, because they're impressed by that. And so now somebody's kind of raised the bar there, and now it's a little bit more expected across the board for maybe all their shipments or their company-wide, and then their friend at another manufacturer or whatnot gets wind of it. Now they want it, and everybody wants it. Well, eventually, most drivers are just going to have it on their phone. That's kind of the way things are going. Love it or hate it, and that's just kind of the future of the industry is technology based and driven. So hopefully with that, though, there'll be a lot less hiccups and ideally less phone calls directly to the driver while they're driving or sleeping, or the case may be. And certain brokers can also learn to rely and trust that technology before them with the location that they're being given through that app or technology provider.
Yeah, I've kind of come to that conclusion too, that if we would just use the technology as it's intended to, it actually could make both parties' lives a little bit simpler, meaning the broker he has live view, he can see where the load's at all times. And from the driver's perspective, hopefully I don't have a broker blowing up my phone all the time. They're using the tracking as intended, right?
Absolutely. As with anything, though, people are going to be resistant to change, and not everybody is open to embracing it, though. But as time goes on, it's just kind of one of those things, it's away with the landline phones. Everybody's got cell phones now. So just a new way of tracking. And in theory, it should make everybody's life easier and your phone ring a lot less as long as you keep it active and there's no disconnecting the app while you're en route.
Yeah, and the arguments I hear from drivers, there's a couple of them usually, is first of all, they don't want this app on their phone. It's their phone, it's their property. You shouldn't be able to make me download. And I kind of get that. I think that argument probably held more water back when we didn't have endless data plans, right?
200 minutes.
Yeah, right.
Free nights and weekends.
Then it was eating up some of your data and stuff, and I certainly understand that. But I think for the most part today, everybody's just an unlimited type data plan, so it's not really hurting you. And the other thing is, if you're worried about people tracking you, what do you think Google's doing, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you're using the GPS on and it needs your location, it's tracking you and it's telling you where to go. So, and also, it kind of also goes back to the fact that a lot of brokers are willing to pay extra money on the load to ensure that you use that tracking. So your cell phone bill is going to cost less than you're getting paid per month. You're going to get paid more on that one load to track than your cell phone bill is for 1 month. So there really is no reason to do it. You can actually monetize it and make more money by tracking, because places I've been, if you end up disconnecting that app or the tracking, guess what? They dock you whatever they paid you for it. They're not going to pay you just because you installed it and then disconnected it. So you can make more money by allowing the tracking to happen and just it's just an industry standard anymore for the tracking.
Yeah, and I've seen that too. And if the drivers aren't aware of that, a lot of times what the broker will do when they send the rate con over to the driver, there'll be some fine print on there. And they'll do it one of two ways. Either they say, if your driver doesn't track, we're going to penalize you $100 or $200 off the agreed price, or they set it up as a bonus and say, here's the price the load pays, but if your driver tracks, it pays an extra $100 and stuff like that. So that seems to be kind of the trend with most brokers. And I know, talking to other carriers, we've had some conversations. It's like, how do you handle that when your driver turns off the tracking or deletes the app or whatever in the middle of a load? And I think a lot of carriers are getting to the point and say, listen, we tell the driver the expectation up front that they need to track the load, and this is why. Please understand that, this is why. And if you do that, and if they penalize us that $100, then guess what? We're going to pass it on to the driver if there wasn't a good reason they turned it off.
And absolutely, as they should, and everybody's different. And some people are more willing to play ball. It's just something you got to handle on the carrier side in-house to make sure they're doing it, because you're losing revenue and profit by not doing it.
Right. Yep. Unrealistic delivery expectations is something that, comes to mind with working with brokers sometimes. So, by the time I get the load from dispatch and send it over, and by the time I get loaded in the day, and then they want this thing there the next morning or whatever that is, it's not realistic. So, as a driver, I'm feeling pressured to run over my hours because somebody's already set this appointment time. What am I supposed to do about that?
Well, it's all about communication, in between the broker, the dispatcher, the driver, or if you spoke to the driver directly. So if the broker speaks to the driver directly prior to the pickup, that's one way to kind of iron out those wrinkles and make sure everybody's on the same page and set this, expectations and make sure that you're going to be able to meet those expectations. And if not, maybe the broker has to find another carrier and the driver another load. But nobody's upset at delivery by missing an appointment. There are times where you communicate something to dispatch, and again, they may just be wanting to cover a truck so they can go home. Right. They book the load, hoping for the best, assuming everything will work out on its own, and maybe they don't take the repercussions seriously about what happens if you miss delivery. You're working, or maybe it was a Friday delivery, now you can't get unloaded till Monday, and then no layover because that dispatcher just wanted a load for somebody. So it comes back to communication, and it's also on the broker to do their homework to make sure they've reached out to that receiver and see what happens if an appointment's missed, or where to go from there, what any other options would be. Certainly if it happens, if a driver has a breakdown or blows a tire, whatever, and is running late, I like to think that with that receiver or even perhaps the shipper, depending on the situation, that you could work out a mutually beneficial win-win situation with them for everybody involved, for both the shipper, receiver, the driver, and of course the broker, just to know that you put out some fires and everybody's happy.
You just brought something up when you were talking there and stuff, and it reminded me of something. So talk about breakdowns. This is one of the things that happens in our industry where somebody's not going to make delivery or something's changed on the dispatch side of things, and it's like, gosh, what should we tell the broker? Just tell them the truck broke down. How often do you believe that stuff? I mean, be honest, really.
As often as, somebody might tell you the load got canceled and you don't want to believe that, or that we're just posting fake loads. So, I mean, it's unfortunate because that's the common go-to excuse. Yep. I can provide you a receipt. Well, okay. And I've also got Photoshop on my computer too. So it's just one of those, like, be honest when it happens and be realistic about it. If it did break down, when's it going to be out of the shop? If it's a driver issue because they quit and you got to repower it, when's that going to happen? Yeah. Let's just be honest with each other and work through it. Hiding from the truth just hurts everybody, because anything that we in turn say, we get information from the carrier, oh, this is what they're telling us, truck broke down, be out of the shop this day. We in turn are taking that information, passing it on to the people that need to know on the shipping, receiving end, the customers. So if you're lying to us, we in turn are now lying to everybody else involved. And I don't like to lie to people. It's just,
right.
Honesty is the best policy. It's how I was raised. And I think it's just a good way to do business. So be honest and let's not hide things from each other and shoot each other straight.
Yeah, trucking's certainly an imperfect industry, and things happen beyond our control sometime. And I think everybody understands that. So if we just, like I say, be honest with each other, we'd be better off. I want to ask you about detention, layover, those kind of things too, because I feel like as a driver, if I get held up at a receiver, shipper, whatever that might be, I almost feel like I get the runaround from my dispatcher, but they're blaming it on you. So what's the real story there? Are you able to collect detention and layover from your customers typically? Do you have that built into your contracts with them? And if so, why does it have to be so difficult?
Well, I mean, it's one of those things where it's kind of, when the customers pressure me, like, why is it not delivered yet? Or where's your truck at? Well, I'm not driving it. Same thing on the carrier side. I'm not the one loading it or unloading it, so I don't make the rules. It's just part of being the intermediary. Certain customers have their own policies about the detention. Most industry standards after 2 hours, but lately I've encountered more that they want the first 3 or 4 hours free to load, and they won't pay detention unless it's in 2-hour increments, or some will be in 15-minute increments. And they're just trying to find ways to save money for themselves. And some of these are publicly traded companies, so they're not hard up, but they're trying to cut their costs too, be it due to inflation or cost of materials or cost of goods sold. So we want to go to bat for the carrier anytime we can request attention. I mean, if the driver was there on time like he was supposed to be, we're especially going to go to bat for it. And there can be times where maybe the customer is not going to pay us attention, but the driver did his part, and we don't want to leave a bad taste in their mouth. So there's times where we'll try to get them something, pay them a little extra out of our own pocket to appease them and show them, like, we're not the bad guy, because we're not. But it just works that way sometimes, and we get a bad rap for it. We do go to bat for the carriers to get them paid. We don't want to cheat anybody, where they're the ones out there doing the work, the hard part, in my opinion. So I want to take care of them. But sometimes the customers just don't see everything the same way that myself or a carrier or driver do, unfortunately.
Yeah, and I think it goes back to that, the number one thing we talked about again, back to that communication piece. As long as myself as a driver, as long as I'm communicating with you, keeping you in the loop as it's happening, not after the fact or not tomorrow, tell you about what happened, but keep you in the loop as it's happening, then you're more apt, you have the leverage that way to go back to the customer and go, listen, I've got the driver's there, he's been there, he was on time, and maybe they're more apt to pay that stuff.
And also one thing a driver can always do to help their case is to get those in and out times signed off on the paperwork. I mean, that helps, because if the customer can come back and maybe they just don't want to pay it or try to avoid it any way they can. Like, well, did they get the in and out time signed off? And if somebody didn't, and we're like, no, well, then their next play is always to us. Well, how do I know?
Right.
So if you get that signed off, that's just a way to protect yourself in those situations too. And it gives us something to go back to the customer with, to go to, more ammo in our arsenal to go to bat for you and help deny their ability to deny paying the detention, essentially.
Yeah. By the way, great conversation. Thanks for all that. I want to wrap it up by asking you, you've been in this business 15 years. If you could give drivers advice on how to make things work better and smoother when working with brokers, what would that advice be?
Just communication, have a positive attitude. We all have a job to do. It may not be that individual's broker that's reaching out to you, be it the excessive calls or texts or whatever it is. That could just be their company's procedure or their customer's policy that they have to do that. Just ask the questions and ask the why. Why do we have to do it this way? Is there a specific reason? Feel free to always offer, or counter with a different solution. I know with our fleet, we have Samsara on all our trucks, so we can send a customer or a broker a link that tracks that truck and that load for them. Meet halfway, work together, know we all got a job to do, and it's a lot easier to do it when we all work together.
Yeah. So just understand that's what we're all in it together. A message to drivers is, why do we have to have brokers in the industry anyway? And I can tell you in our own fleet, we haul maybe anywhere from 18 to 22% of our freight as brokers, but it's freight that we use to reposition our fleet trucks back into our power lanes, into our main traffic lanes and stuff. So that's the purpose of using brokers. Instead of bouncing somewhere, getting unpaid, sometimes you can work with a broker that has a load that works to get you back into a regular shipper or back home to your home base, something like that. And that's the purpose. And I think that's the way most carriers use brokers, is just to help reposition those trucks and get them back into lanes.
Yeah, it's a necessary evil, and I've been on that side of it in terms of finding asset, drivers for companies I've been at, backhauls and such. And I knew the brokers I was going to call first and the ones I wasn't going to call at all. But having established those relationships, I knew who to call first. Say, hey, what do you got for me from point A to B? Get my guy back home. So building those relationships and working on communication, the more you work together, the easier things get, the more trust is built, and things just go more smoothly.
Yeah, great conversation today. Appreciate you joining us.
Yeah, thank you.
You bet. Thanks for joining us on this episode of Driven Too Far. We want to hear your feedback on working with brokers, so leave us a comment below and check us out at chiefcarriers.com.